suppose, close out the NFC East review with the Eagles, and the Eagles go to the Super Bowl, and Jalen Hurts probably really should have been the MVP if it wasn't for that last drive by Mahomes. I suppose he is the MVP, and to play in a game and be so close to winning the Super Bowl and put up so many points and yet walk away from a defeat, and I suppose they can hold their head high up. And we've seen in the past, Colin, where teams have gone to the Super Bowl, look like they're kind of ready to come back again, and it doesn't materialise for one reason or another. You don't get the sense with this team, bearing in mind what Howie Roseman has done during this offseason.
No, but that said, that there will be issues. To me, losing Shane Steichen is probably the biggest one, because I think Shane Steichen is a gifted coach. When you consider what he did with Justin Herbert and what he did with Jalen Hurts, it wasn't just one quarterback. Like, Herbert is phenomenal, but Herbert hasn't been as phenomenal ever since Steichen up sticks and left the Chargers. So I think that will be the big question, is around Brian Johnson and what the offense looks like. In terms of Gannon, look, this is despite the fact they got 70 sacks last year. There were murmurings of discontent from the defense throughout the year. I mean, that was what was kind of bananas about this. Now, look,
was it only 70 sacks, Colin? I thought it was like 500. Gannon giving these interviews saying they were 100 sacks ahead of the next best team.
Yeah. After 8 games or something like that, Connor, I think was his quote when he went down to Arizona. It would be difficult for them to maintain that. So no matter kind of what they do, I'm sure the spotlight will be saying they're not as effective. But you'd have to say Howie has put them in a great position. The other thing is, like, when you consider Hurts, when you look at everything he did, right, and it was so impressive. But remember that he missed, games because he was hurt, and when he came back, he still wasn't right, and he still put up that level of performance. So look, they have found their guy. They got the deal done. The camp seems happier that Gannon has moved on. Sirianni, to me, is the perfect coach, but one must beware of hubris, particularly when it comes to Philadelphia. We all remember the infamous Dream Team. They have shied away from making any pronouncements like that. And in fairness, Hurts seems to be very, very sensible. We saw him, remember, on the sideline last year when Sirianni was enjoying himself, and Hurts was the one who came over, put the arm on the shoulder and said, there's a long way to go yet, coach. So I think they're in very good hands with their GM, their head coach, and their QB. There will be those question marks, but they enter certainly this division as favourites, and rightfully so.
Connor, Hargrave goes to the Niners, Edwards goes to the Bears, 2 marquee players at the front 7. How important was it, in your opinion, that they kept hold of Slay and Bradbury in terms of the secondary? Because at one stage, Slay was being released and it looked like Bradbury wasn't going to be maintained, and came to a contract with him, and then Slay quickly signs up again. You touched on it last week. I mean, your secondary is only as good as your front 7 are doing. Do you see any scenario where there'll be a bit of a drop-off? They have brought in some other players, and whether they're at the level of those guys who have left is another thing.
Look, I think there's 2 classic mistakes that we make in these off-season predictions, right? We either assume that too much will be different, or we assume that way too much will be the same. And, the Eagles put me in that quandary where everything you're seeing suggests there's every reason that they should run it back. And then you remember that historically that's not the way it goes. Only 2 teams in NFL history have ever lost the Super Bowl and come back to win one the following season. The Patriots did it obviously relatively recently, ironically having lost to the Eagles, came back the next year and beat the Rams. The previous team to do it was Don Shula's unbeaten 72 Dolphins. It does not happen that often, and it doesn't happen for a reason. It's really, really difficult to do. And you touched on part of the reason, Colin. When you make a big run like the Eagles did, your coordinators tend to come up for grabs, and they're going to get head coaching jobs, as the Eagles have seen. I totally agree with you. I think Steichen is the bigger loss than Gannon there. it's funny to think, for all of the praise that we and others have given Howie Roseman, they could have played last season with Russell Wilson. It turned out one of the more entertaining stories of the offseason was the potential Russell Wilson trade to the Eagles that in the end didn't happen. And I'm sure Eagles fans are delighted, given how last season played out, that it didn't. You'd find it hard to see that the Eagles aren't going to make a deep run, though. All things being equal, and if everybody stays healthy, and health was something that, in large part, they could rely on last year, as pretty much every team that makes a deep playoff run has going for them. It's nearly always the healthiest teams. You correlate the healthy teams and the talented teams, and it's health that gets you the extra mile and gets you over the hump in the playoffs. People were kind of putting Jalen Hurts down at a certain point last season, saying, well, anybody could win with that team around them. But then Gardner Minshew came in and, they weren't performing at anything like the same level. So, Hurts has been huge for them. He's made that huge progress for them. And, we want to see him at 100% health this season. I think that they start off like a juggernaut. I don't think that, Roseman's probably his biggest achievement during the offseason has been that they didn't lose a lot of the names in free agency that we thought that they might, and that was a big question mark over them. They seem to have, in fact, added a little bit of strength. The additions that he's made have had people scratch their heads going, how did they get that guy? The likes of DeAndre Swift coming in. He's made some clever moves. But what got you to the top of the mountain or near the top of the mountain last year isn't going to be enough to get there this year. So they need to do better and they need to do more. And, I think Sirianni's up for that fight. He seems to me like the kind of guy who's not gonna by any means rest on that laurels. They were so tantalizingly close, put up that kind of performance offensively in the Super Bowl, undone the way they were. It's a tough beat to take. And I think, I expect them to be thereabouts again this season, but it's again, historically, a really tough thing to do.
Colin, when Conor Rogers from NBC was on the show, he said if it wasn't for the off-field stuff that went on, Jalen Carter was the standout player in this draft, and Eagles find a way to pick him. They moved from 10 up to 9 with the Bears to pick him up. They then get Nolan Smith at 30, two Georgia players, Keely Ringo, who was supposed to be going off for a lot earlier than which he did. Like, is he essentially looking at him as the most pro-ready college and will pick those players? Or do you think it's just a fortune of events, how the things played out? Or do you think they really did home in on Georgia?
I think they did, but I think it's a number of things. Like, we've seen it before, and the Eagles have done it before. It's not just Georgia. They like to bring in a number of players from a particular college, and they do that because they think it helps guys to settle into the league, and it helps the cohesion. So I think that the fact that Georgia are so historically good, right, and take the LSU offense, right, Joe Burrow, Justin Jefferson, Ja'Marr Chase, they've done pretty well in the league. And so if you look at that, and you look at the Georgia defense, you can understand why they're doing it. And the fact is that the guys last year who they brought in have now had a year to transition, to learn from the players, and they've been very smart in their ability to do that, right? And go to Sue, right, a player who is known for being, super nasty, right? I think if you talk to a lot of NFL fans, that's the thing that stands out. But he is such a deep thinker, and when you hear teammates talk about him and his willingness to work with them, to teach them, to mentor them, that's what they've done. They've done the same with Jurgens, who they brought in on the O-line. They have been very clever about bringing guys in, not having to over-rely on them. Now, injury plays a huge part in that. They have been fortunate. That is the ultimate wild card. But I can see why they have leaned in to Georgia. There's a reason that Georgia were so successful, and that defense was star-studded. And now we get to see what that looks like in the NFL, and it's like they've gone for, I suppose, Jordan Davis, who is such a kind of a physical freak, and I mean that in the truest sense of the word. Like, this is a human being who shouldn't move, like, at a size, who moves at speeds that human beings shouldn't move at. And then you've got, say, Nakobe Dean, who is known for being such a cerebral player and a real quarterback of the defense. So, yeah, they've been very, very smart. But I said it time and time and time again. You don't know what the transition into the league looks like. And yeah, there are certainly concerns around Jalen Carter and maturity, alongside everything else regarding the car accident and the people who lost their lives.
I can't recall how many years it is now since one team has won back-to-back NFC East. I think we're going back maybe 15, 16 years. And in an era where it's a 40% strike rate of teams that make the playoffs going back the following year, it'd be interesting to see if 3 teams come back out of the NFC East this year. Interesting times ahead in this division. That is our NFC East recap of the offseason. Colin, Connor, I appreciate your time. Thank you.